Okay. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. Today's episode is titled "The Road Paved for Smiling Future Generations," and I thought it was important and crucial to share. Let me actually fix this music thing. Hold on for a second. We cannot ignore the human being's existential position. And we cannot ignore how there is something that exists and we have opened our eyes in it as a moment of experience. Human beings, came a day where I looked at just humanity. I wondered about our civilization's effort, as if every human being is involved, engaged with their individual game of living, and their game of living has to do with elements of survival, and not just physical survival, emotional survival, intellectual survival, and even the survival of the communicating mind. Now, it's as if the world has brought forth certain unique players called Homo sapiens. And now these players are a part of nature where for the first time this part of nature has consciousness. You see, this is something that the philosophers debate about, what differentiates man from an animal. You see, both man and the animal die, right? Inferior animals compared to the human beings' intelligence. It's like we both die. But the thing is, we are aware of our death. And because we're aware of a certain time that there's an existential performance, that existential performance gets value. There comes inspiration. What that means is, believe it or not, if there was no such thing as death, the free will would not have any meaning. It would just be this endless loop, you know? So in some sense, the world is a strange place. So human beings, be realistic. Dear listener, when you hear this, really think about it. If you saw the whole species from a bird eye's view, let's say this is the day after. Okay, maybe I'll bring that context in later. But imagine we're from a dove, like in the sky, we're looking at humanity, and we're looking at people's lives in a kind of time-lapse, fast-forward motion. We would see that most people, the position that society has given them is to, in some sense, at max, the influence of the person is evoked. Unless the person enters the concrete jungle and begins in some sense building their own position and then granting an audience, kind of like when we see Jordan Peterson, this university professor. Of course he's a university professor, he has an audience, but it was that when the world began to see his content, they started to, in some sense, listen to him, really. And content has to do with its value and necessity at the time that it is being shared. And so Mr. Within's concern is simply this. that we, whether we like it or not, are directly and indirectly contributing to what kind of world the future generations will open their eyes. And so I find that we have gotten caught in games of spirit and matter for too long. That means some people have a metaphysical approach to life, some people have a purely physical approach to life, but in the middle of this, humanity is being ignored. Humanity is being ignored on an extreme level, on a level that it's as if ideological correctness is more valuable than the person's, in some sense, freedom. We are still in an era of idea worship. This road that must be paid for the smile of future generation. Another way of saying the title is that the free will of today must try to, as soon as it can, get out of the stories of its conditioning, take a good look at the world prior to any belief, and then live for what the experience moves the person towards in regards to value. You see, if you go ask a common man, let's say a blue collar working guy, and you're like, where's the meaning of your life coming from? He's like, it's coming from my work. And then you tell him, why are you working? Where's the meaning of that coming from? And the guy says, it comes from my family because I gotta feed my family. And you go tell him, where's the meaning of the family coming from? And then the guy says, because this is a cruel world and you gotta do this and do this. And then you say, where's the meaning of a cruel world coming up? And you see it all comes down to the earliest axiom, the earliest kind of belief of how the world is that is defining your inspiration here. You know, it's the mind is very spectacular. Sometimes the present moment, can be influenced by a totally complete other moment. You see, as playfully as one can say, a person's attention, let's say a person sitting in the room and suddenly the person thinks of like a moment in their childhood and they go into a daydream, and the person talking to them is like, yo man, this guy isn't paying attention, he's somewhere else. And the reason I'm trying to say, because it's kind of like in that moment, the past, the memory occupied the attention. And that was my question, because to be honest, I had a dream once, and in this dream, I could completely move. I could go left and right, like it was like a free movement. And then I woke up shocked because I'm like, even if when my body is inactive and asleep, my mind is simulating a body for me to move in. And then when I woke up, I began to wonder how much of the world is actually there's a body involved in it. You know, it's like, do I ever see the body, or is this still the same mind as the dream state? And so these are unique kind of contemplations. Every person in their life, their belief system will be challenged by the forces of nature. It's natural. What I'm trying to get to is that right now, like I came to a position personally where I asked myself, what were people doing thousands of years ago? I was drawn to history. When I was drawn to history, I began to see the struggles of various lifetimes. And sometimes the great minds and philosophers that they teach in our educational systems, their greatness is not just in what they said, but it is in how they lived. And for me, the human being is too fragmented into various stories, as if people will be nice to you if you tell them the right story, and if you tell them the wrong story, the guy would get angry. And what does that say of the species? It is still caught in wars of language, games of language. That means there is still like this is a kind of vision. Some people believe like language. It sounds like okay. Let me say it like this: language. At least I personally say this. Language is a bridge between inner dimensions of people. Now, there was a point where there was no communication. This is why certain scholars of language, they personally believe, like, how would I say it? Like, they believe there was meaning before language. That means the caveman came and said, ooh, ooh, ooh. Like, it meant, like, get away from me. But, like, there was no words for it. There was no language for it. Yet the meaning, the intentions of the living phenomena and activity was there, right? So now we're reaching a point where I find the inner reality of the human being is becoming more externalized. The more our knowledge as a species increases, the more in deeper, profound ways we're looking at our actual existential and experiential position. Now, my argument is this: that if we were thousands of years, like very much into the future, before the mind of man could imagine just a train station, as if there were no trains, somebody thought of building a train station. Then the mind of man began envisioning a train station in the clouds, and what that means is, in some sense, metaphysical positions, non local, non shaped ideas, in some sense, entered man's reality. These non shaped ideas were pointers to the unknown. That means when you truly look at what spirituality is, it is how at the edges of what you know, there's some unknown phenomena going on. And this is what I find people don't consider in the lifetime. They think everything should be known and everything should be precise. And they don't have a sort of contentment and an acceptance of the unknown. The moment a person chooses a sort of shape, then relationships build automatically. The moment you choose you're a good person, your attention suddenly notices all the bad things that can happen. The moment you feel you're a bad person, you all suddenly see all the good things that happen. And this is kind of embedded in the psychology of the human being, that once it falls to the extreme of one polarity of its reality spectrum, literally it just goes to one extreme, whether it's chaos or order. For in this universal, in this plane of existence, it tends to be chaos and order. So the person has to in some sense acknowledge these ways that the forces of nature express themselves. Sometimes it's chaotic, sometimes it's ordered. The more we go back in history, the more we see the savage dimensions of man being awake. And then suddenly it's as if they go dormant and the attention of the human being moves towards a different program of behavior. You see, it's kind of strange. It's as if biologically or DNA wise, the person has no free will, no choice. It's as if your purpose is to be what you are, pretty much, right? And so genetically, it's as if there's a certain design, there's a sort of program of nature written, which is your manifest biological existence. Now, this program of existence has reached a sophisticated level where it can translate objectivity as subjectivity, and in some sense, we have become a self in the brain, a sense of self in the brain. This sense of self is a sort of personhood that is kept through, in some sense, how would I say it? It's a sort of personhood kept by the separation of the character with the world. True mysticism dissolves that separation. This is why a lot of people who go towards yoga, I'm not sure if they know what it is. Yoga is union. What does that mean? That means your individual life, you have reached the edge of its value and you're wondering why. And that's when um, the unknown serves you. Theories upon the unknown serve you. That means Mr. Within is not saying everybody run in the cave and meditate. It's impossible to silence a world when the civilization and society, its intelligence is based on noise. You see, I'm trying to find a sort of other route out of the various linguistic simulations that the sense of self and in some sense is held in. So what I find is when I say a road paved for smiling future generations, just think about it. There are roads where you literally hire a construction company and you pave a road. But there are roads which are, in some sense, ideological. It's as if you saw language as architecture. If we stopped trying to be language and we just saw it as a technology and we saw that the words we leave behind influence the direction of the eyes of the future generations more than, in some sense, how the world looks to them. The child's purpose is, in some sense, not to believe the old too much. This is something I wish. It's not that I wish, but I like. I feel I was raised around more ancient ideology than modern, you know. And in some sense, it's a sort of inspiration because once you're in a traditional atmosphere, you see beyond tradition. You seek. It's as if the nature of man gets bored. That means, trust me, if people had an experience of their ultimate true nature, they would experience it, but they would get bored. And you see, it's a sort of urge of existence to have legs. You see, it's as if our evolutionary design is not just based on, macro field forces. It's as if it has to do with a sort of movement. It's as if it doesn't matter if you're alive or not. If you never moved, we would never know how the free will or the mind is there. You see? And of course, speech is the movement of sound. Language becomes interesting when you realize you're a data processing creature. Every day you wake up, waves of data hit you, and the data from yesterday is more and has moved more in the unconscious. And this is why they say you should live not just for the moment, you should live in the moment. Living in the moment doesn't mean you have to ignore everything and just be present. It means that life is having various movements, various things are happening, and it all comes down to the attention of the being. Your attention is your soul's steering wheel. They asked Osho if life has a purpose. Osho said life has no purpose. Life is the purpose. Once the intelligence starts relating or identifying not as just a sort of specific doer, a sort of only with a specific doership with the world, the person starts to identify with how the world is being. And sometimes it is so purely simply being here, it's prior to your ideas. And when you notice that, you in some sense find a sort of like the Zen master's sacred silence, a sort of silence where before the mind moves, the watcher or the witness within that's looking out through the eyes is content, as if like somebody said, why does man see? And somebody said because he wants to be, in some sense, wants to know more about himself. In some sense, there's this hadith. A hadith is how would I explain it to a secular audience? It's like a hadith is like something that the Prophet of Islam said, not something that's written in the Quran. And the Sufi dervishes follow this specific hadith, even though the traditional Muslims don't, and there's a reason, because it has kind of, I believe, Hindu interpretation twist on it. So Islam and Hinduism, there's a major difference. But I'm saying, anyways, the Sufi dervish tradition, which is not necessarily Hindu, but the what I'm trying to say is that how would I say it? The hadith is called Hadith Qudsi, and it's like this passage that evidently what the hadith is saying is God was unknown. God was like, I was unknown, and I wanted to be known. And so there's this idea in there that the whole urge of existential phenomena's movement is the will of some sort of ultimate intelligence wanting to know itself. And when in many religious circles, you can totally see that the people are under the impression that there is this prime mover, and this prime mover is as if we are all being watched, as if we're on like some table being all watched. In some sense, there's a prime mover. There's some hand, the hand of an unknown chess master is moving the chess pieces. Okay. Um, the thing is, it has to do with knowledge, and knowledge is how much data you have and what this data is leading to. And once you see that every moment is like, in some sense, is like a novel projection of your intelligence, your relationship with your identity changes. You no longer you no longer think you're just a personality bound by language. The unknown ways that life is present suddenly become known because the knowledge base has reached its edge, like a brim of a cup that's full. You know, a cup that's full to the brim. You know. So awareness, self-awareness, is, I think, the final evolutionary step. And this awareness, once it's freed from beyond the notion of a self, no longer has a biological or technological dependence. So what that means is it's as if the attention, I mean, this is, I think this could be a bit too early. I'm talking about this, but true freedom cannot be caged. And I find the unknown and the unconscious aspects of the mind, the more dimensions the person sees, the more meanings arise. In regards to imagination, your imagination's purpose is to become infinity. Your memory's purpose is, in some sense, to just be. Memories, they're just images. What is aware of the imagery? What is the free will? That's the thing. That's the main argument. That free will is an attributeless presence of attention that is being the whole moment. As Carl Jung says, if you don't make the unconscious conscious, it will dictate your life and you will call it fate. Mr.Within is saying our ancestors explored the outside world, and in this current modernity there must come initiatives and groups of movements of people wondering about the inner reality. And the inner reality appears to us through stories, but what is beyond stories? And where is language going? Where are the winds of evolution pulling or moving language? It's as if, just like how some people say everybody has a phone now, everybody's attention's on their phones. I find in the same way there was an inner technology like the phone that we have gained an obsession with. And I bet you know what I'm going to say, language. Ludwig Wittgenstein says, the limits of my language are the limits of my world. And so I wonder, is that true experientially? Existentially, it is 100% true. Because if you can't put it into words, it doesn't exist as a concept. But experientially, Marcus Aurelius is known to say, the soul is dyed with the colors of its thoughts. There is on some level no attribute. Anyways, just to end off the talk, to kind of summarize where I'm going. We are alive once. Every day happens once. Since the day our eyes opened, we have been kind of processing data. Many waves of data hit the person. The person eventually will give in and choose to be identified with a certain wave of data that has hit it. If the entity, if the being in the moment doesn't care for its attention, it won't care for what its attention is on. The moment you care for your attention is when you realize that attention is your world. Know this. Anybody who can, who in some sense, it's all like what is. I shouldn't say much, but it's as if they control your attention. There's nothing you can see. And that's the issue, that we are controlling our own attention, and sometimes our desires are prohibiting the deeper dimensions of our evolution, I find. Now, is there a need to see the world at such a zoomed-in lens as I am? When we can live in the world in a way where our children in the future generations open their eyes and they're like, wow, our pioneers were evolved, then their inspiration will be our smile. There was this very unique kind of passage, I don't know where it was from, but the passage said something like, it was a letter from like the past to the future. And the letter from the past to the future was saying something like, we will live for you, and you will live for us to the future generations. And what it meant is that man creates enough of an advanced technology that with that technology, they can bring back all the human beings. Like when they make time travel, it's as if nobody is dead, you know? Beyond the language threshold, eternal wings tend to find the pilot of consciousness. Remember your clarity before your ignorance. The world turns, and so do we. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Much blessings and namaste.